In the last year of World War II, one single night of fire unleashed on one city became the deadliest air attack in all of human history. We're talking about an event called Black Snow, a story about a terrifying strategic change, a massive moral shift, and the inferno that really paved the way for the atomic bomb. Just think about that number for a second. 100,000. That's how many men, women, and children were killed in Tokyo in a single night. And no, this wasn't from a nuclear weapon. This was something else entirely. The firestorm that night was unbelievable. It reached temperatures of up to 2,800 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, that's hot enough to liquefy asphalt on the roads, melt concrete buildings, and literally boil the water in rivers where people were trying to find safety. Okay, so picture this. It's just after midnight, March 10th, 1945. Almost 300 American B-29 bombers appear over Tokyo and begin their attack. They ignite this cataclysm that burns a quarter of the entire city to the ground. So the question is, how on earth did the strategy get to this point? Well, the story really starts with the weapon that made it all possible, the B-29 Superfortress. It was an absolute marvel of technology, for sure, but it was also a deeply flawed billion-dollar gamble. Just look at the scale of this project. The B-29 program cost more than the Manhattan Project, the secret project to build the atomic bomb. But for all that cash, this plane was a temperamental beast. Its engines were so powerful, they constantly overheated. They were a massive fire risk. Pilots used to joke that they weren't sure if the real enemy was the Japanese or the plane they were flying. And the entire American strategy was built around this idea of high-altitude precision bombing. But there was a huge problem nobody saw coming: the jet stream. These incredibly powerful winds, high over Japan, were blowing the bombs so far off course that the advanced bomb sites were useless. The billion-dollar bombers weren't hitting a thing. The man in charge at the time was General Haywood Hansel. He was a true believer in what he called humane bombing. He was part of this group called the Bomber Mafia, and they were all about sticking to the plan, hit industrial targets, win the war, but do everything you can to avoid killing civilians. A noble idea, for sure. But here's the thing. It wasn't working, and Washington was getting very, very impatient. And that pressure for results, it led to a massive change. Hansel was fired, and his replacement was Major General Curtis LeMay, a man with a completely different and much more brutal philosophy. This is the exact moment where the strategy, and really the morality of the air war itself, was about to change forever. I mean, the contrast between these two guys could not be more clear. LeMay came in and just threw out Hansel's entire playbook. He didn't see civilians as something to be avoided. No, he saw them as part of the industrial web that kept Japan's war machine going. His priority wasn't precision. It was pure maximum destruction. And LeMay, well, LeMay knew exactly what he was doing. Before he launched this mission, he reportedly told his staff, "If we lose the war, we'll be tried as war criminals." He understood perfectly that he was crossing a line, and that winning was the only thing that could possibly justify what he was about to do. So his new plan was this radical four-part gamble. First, fly low, way down at 5,000 feet to get under that pesky jet stream. Second, fly at night so Japanese fighters couldn't see them. Third, and this was crazy, he ordered the B-29 stripped of all their defensive guns so they could carry more bombs. He left his men totally vulnerable. And fourth, and most important, he swapped the high-explosive bombs for thousands of pounds of new incendiaries filled with napalm. These things weren't designed to explode. They were designed to burn. So that brings us back to that night. And now, understanding the context, we can start to see the brutal logic that led to what one pilot later described as staring into the mouth of hell. The result? 16 square miles of Tokyo. An area that made up a quarter of the entire city was just gone, incinerated. LeMay's gamble had paid off with horrifying efficiency. For the people on the ground, it was nothing short of an apocalypse. One survivor, who was only 12 years old at the time, described the firestorm like a giant tidal wave of fire, just rolling across the city, consuming block after block of wooden homes. The evidence that was left behind speaks to a level of heat that's almost impossible to imagine. Investigators found kitchenware that had literally fused with clay roof tiles. They found melted concrete and steel. The smell of burning flesh was so powerful that it drifted thousands of feet up into the cockpits of the B-29s. People's coins melted in their pockets. And that's where the name for this whole event comes from. The survivors called the aftermath Black Snow. It was the physical fallout from the inferno, a mix of soot, ash, and the charred remains of everything and everyone, just raining down from the sky for days. You see, the raid on Tokyo wasn't just a single, awful event. It was a true turning point. It marked this profound moral shift in the war, one that would pave the road for everything that was still to come. Back in Washington, officials were watching very closely. They were reading the newspapers, listening to the radio, basically holding their breath, waiting for a public outcry over the deliberate mass killing of civilians. But you know what? That outrage never came. Instead, you got things like this from Time magazine. Properly kindled, Japanese cities will burn like autumn leaves. That lack of backlash was seen as a green light. The moral barrier had been broken, and the path was now clear for LeMay to do it again and again and again. And this right here, this is the point that's so often misunderstood or just completely forgotten in history. Just look at these numbers. The firebombing of Tokyo on one night caused more immediate deaths and destroyed a vastly larger area than either of the atomic bombs that would be dropped 5 months later. So what does all this mean? It means that by the time the atomic bomb was ready, the idea of completely wiping a city off the map was no longer some shocking new concept. It was just a more efficient way of doing what LeMay had already been doing for months. The moral line had already been crossed long before Hiroshima. Which leaves us with a really difficult question, right? The argument at the time, and for years after, was that this brutal firebombing campaign and the atomic bombs ended the war faster and saved lives by avoiding a ground invasion. But when you look back at the black snow that fell on Tokyo, you have to ask, in a total war, when you're pursuing victory, where is the line? And what's the true price you're willing to pay?